Greetings. My name is Brad Guhr. I'm the Education Coordinator at Dick Arboretum of the Plains in Heston, Kansas. And I want to welcome you to our Native Plant School and this presentation on monarchs attracting and hosting a favorite insect. A brief outline of what we'll cover here will include the latest on the status of the monarch with regard to the Endangered Species Act, the life cycle of the monarch, its migration details, threats both caused by humans and natural, and what we can do to help monarchs, including what we plant, who we network with, and how we go about those details. Latest on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the monarch status. The consideration for putting the monarch butterfly on the endangered species list has been something that's been in review for a number of years now. They just came out with their findings in mid-December to determine that although there is protection that is warranted for this species, they are not going to give it either threatened or endangered species status at this time due to the needs of other species that are a higher priority. So it is listed as a candidate species right now, and they will monitor the need for possibly upgrading it to either threatened or endangered in years to come. And they'll do that on an annual basis. The life cycle of the monarch is a very intriguing one, and I think it's one why we are so enamored with this butterfly. It starts out in its migration process of finding milkweed and laying an egg. Each monarch mother can lay hundreds of eggs on milkweed in various locations. And those eggs need about 4 or 5 days or so to hatch and the larvae for emerge to start eating. That appetite for that little critter is voracious. You can see here the eggs on common milkweed leaves, and they're about the size of a pinhead. The emergence of that caterpillar proceeds to eating the egg itself and then moving on to the milkweed. There are lots of nutrients in that egg, and I've read that they can, even if the eggs are laid too close together, that there can be some cannibalism of the other eggs by the first caterpillar that emerges. Hence the need for the monarch to lay eggs in different locations as much as possible. Here's an example of captive rearing of monarchs and the appetites that are beginning to go to town on this milkweed leaf. They start out as that minuscule, little smaller than a centimeter caterpillar to what you see here being as large as 5 centimeters in length. There are about 5 instars or larval stages that the caterpillar goes through to get to that larger stage. And eventually then it will go into its J shape and start to form the chrysalis, or going into the pupal stage. The chrysalis starts out as that nice jade or green colored chrysalis with gold accents, and it takes about 5 days to progress from that color to the clear stages, and when the adult will eventually emerge. And you can see those various stages here in these various photographs. Eventually, when it emerges, the liquid in the abdomen of that adult butterfly gets pumped into the wings to help them unfold and take its full adult shape. Here's a great poster that you can find on Acorn Naturalist that shows all the different life stages, from the 5 larval stages to the J shape that it eventually forms when the chrysalis starts to take shape, the pupal stages going from the jade colored to the clear, and eventually the emergence of the adult. Migration. Migration is something that allows us to see, at least in Kansas, the monarch butterfly coming through, both going north and south. So they start out in the forests of Mexico. The Oyamel fir forests are where the adult butterflies have arrived in the previous year. They spend those winter months in a reproductive diapause, or basically a dormant stage. And once light cues start to tell them to wake up and consider their migration north, generally around in March, that begins. And it's that generation that becomes fertilized and will head north as far as it can make it. And depending on the conditions and climate and vegetation at what it experiences as it gets further north into the southern United States, depends on where it stops and drops those eggs and begins that process. But basically, it's 2 generations going north and 2 generations coming back south. And here's a diagram that shows a bit more of the range and some of that detail. So the Oyamel fir forests down here in central to southern Mexico, fanning out into the southern Great Plains and Midwest. Kansas sometimes will receive that first batch where it will lay eggs. Sometimes it happens further south, and then we get completely skipped with that next generation. An adult will last for somewhere from 2 to 5 weeks and travel hundreds of miles before it lays those next set of eggs and continues the journey. They end up in the northern United States, southern Canada, and then as they get light cues of shortening days, that journey comes back south again, looking for the proper place to find milkweed, lay its eggs, go through that month-long process of laying eggs to another adult forming, and then continuing on its journey. Here's a monarch in Minnesota, where the butterfly is considered the represented butterfly of the state of Minnesota. And an image in Mexico where the really striking images of just massive groups huddling together in their dormant stage as they overwinter in Mexico. And if you ever are interested, check out videos of this migration process in the Mexican areas of these biosphere reserves. This is one that a friend forwarded to me, and she says it was just basically a life-changing experience to be able to experience that. I hope to do so someday. The flight behavior is fascinating. What cues the migration? Check out this iBiology.org resource where Dr. Stephen Ruppert talks about the influences of polarized UV light, the sun acting as a compass, all this coming together to affect the circadian clocks of the monarch butterfly and different hormones that are involved. It's a fascinating story, and it's one that's actually covered in more detail in the fictional book by Barbara Kingsolver, Flight Behavior, which is a great read, and it really goes into a lot of monarch biology as well. So I'd recommend that. Threats to the monarch butterfly include one of the big ones, what it experiences in its migration route. Here you see that identified in this funnel shape that goes through the plains and Midwest areas of the states. And those are also happen to be the areas where most of the prairie has been existing historically. You see here from the darker representations on this image. The tall grass prairie extent historically, the lighter gray being the mixed grass prairie, and then the lightest gray, barely visible in this image as the short grass prairie. But a lot of the milkweed that the monarch butterfly relies on is found in these mixed to tall grass prairie extents, as you can see from that image here. One of the issues has been the loss of milkweed throughout that range, and one of the top concerns for why we're seeing a diminishing populations of the monarch butterfly. This figure here by Monarch Watch shows the total area occupied by monarch colonies in overwintering sites in Mexico. And over the last 26 years, you're seeing a slight downward trend. There has been lots of variability, of course, from year to year, lots of factors coming into that variability. But overall, there's been a decline, and that decline has coincided with the introduction of no-till agriculture. And no-till agriculture relies on glyphosate and or Roundup, as we also know it, on genetically modified crops that are adapted to glyphosate, and it allows these crops to be not affected by the herbicide, but the herbicide will kill off the competing weeds. And so that's great for producing crops, as you see throughout the Great Plains in the Midwest. But it also is happening in an area that the monarch relies on some of those weeds that have been popping up in agricultural systems for decades now. And all of a sudden, fewer and fewer of those weeds or those milkweeds are available. And so hence what they think has been one of the big drivers of the decline of the monarch butterfly. And in this diagram, you can see where, at least from 2008 to 2011, the greatest increases in acres converted to agriculture, and hence the loss of milkweed is happening through the heart of that monarch flyway. Other threats to the monarch butterfly, as monarch expert Chip Taylor from Monarch Watch identified a number of years ago in a presentation at the Dick Arboretum, he really highlighted the glyphosate as one of the top ones, but also other contributing factors human caused are in the intensive agriculture, meaning that farming from roadside to roadside really, cleans up any chances for milkweed to kind of be hanging out in the fringes of agricultural systems, and that's also contributed to part of the problem for monarchs. Of course, there's habitat loss and development of urban areas. And then throughout our agricultural systems and our urban areas, the uses of insecticides. And, they may be intended to not harm monarchs, but oftentimes these are broadcast, broad scale insecticides that will have an impact on lots of insects, including the monarch. Chip also identified the importance of climate change and how that will continue to have impacts on our ecological systems, including the monarch. And one of the things he highlighted that will be a big part of that impact due to climate change is the increased variability of weather that we'll see in longer and more intense periods of drought, as well as wet periods too. And sometimes, big storms that will happen in, say, the areas of Mexico where the butterfly is overwintering can have huge impacts on one population that's very focused in a small area. But it can also happen in years like 2012 and 2013, where you saw the real dip in the population, and that probably had a lot to do with the drought that was experienced through the Great Plains in the Midwest, when there was very little habitat, no monarch hosting milkweed to be present, and so those kind of influences can be also seen and exacerbated by climate change as well. So that brings us to what can we do to help the monarchs and overcome some of these threats. And that can have a lot to do with planting milkweed. In Kansas, we have 19 different species of native milkweed, and I'm going to highlight some of those that are more popular for the monarch butterfly, including common milkweed, swamp milkweed, green antelope horn, butterfly milkweed, and whorled milkweed. Those are just some of the species that you see in this robust array of species that we have throughout our mixed grass prairie and tall grass prairie regions throughout Kansas. And the five that I will be spending a little bit more focus on now. I get a lot of help from Michael Haddock and his two resources of the Kansas Wildflowers and Grasses website that hosts great amounts of information, including information on the different milkweed species we have in Kansas and photographs of each of those that I will be using in the coming slides to show more about the milkweeds. And also this great coffee table book that is just a stunning book with lots of great information that was put out by Haddock and Craig Freeman and Janae Baer. So first of all, common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, one of the most popular choices for monarchs and the milkweed to lay their eggs. This species has a height of anywhere from generally 3 to 4 to 5 feet tall. It has these very hairy leaves and a little leaf stem, or a pedicel as it's called, about 1/4 inch in length, that helps identify this from some other species. The globe-like circular structure of the inflorescence is also indicative of common milkweed, as is the wonderful aroma that comes from this species when it is producing its full nectar load. The seed pods, when this species is fertilized, will produce these knobby follicles that produce about 200 seeds or a little more in each. Here's an image of the first shoot of milkweed coming up sometime probably in March when this was taken. You see the incidence of more of an unloading of eggs by the monarch in this case, probably where it was experiencing drought in further south areas of Texas and Oklahoma and having to push further north for its first drop of eggs, as can happen from what I've read. But that is generally what I saw in this particular year. A little more of a close-up on the inflorescence of common milkweed and the emerged caterpillar, about 5 centimeters in length. The seed pods, the 200 plus seeds that are beginning to disperse, and as they dry out, you can see these hair-like structures that will help fan out, catch the wind, and act as a dispersal mechanism when the wind carries these seeds to new locations. Seed distribution is not the only way that this species spreads. It also has a robust root system that can go many feet deep and spread laterally, as well as new shoots will emerge vegetatively for common milkweed. It is not unheard of for one plant to turn into many plants in pretty quick succession, as I've seen in my garden, and it all comes together as a very effective strategy for the common milkweed in its spread. Another popular species for the monarch butterfly is swamp milkweed. So whereas the common milkweed is more in drier upland areas, in sort of dry to moderate moisture conditions, swamp milkweed likes it best in pond edges, wetlands, and low areas in the landscape. The species gets to be a little bit taller than common milkweed. I've seen it as high as 4 to 6 feet tall, and has these very beautiful pink flowers and more delicate and small seed pods, of which it produces many more on a plant than common milkweed does. Back to the drier realm of habitat is another popular species choice for the monarch in green antelope horn milkweed, or Asclepias viridis, sometimes also called green milkweed. or green antelope horn. And the green antelope horn has these lighter cream to green flowers and less knobby seed pods. Butterfly milkweed is not only a good choice for the monarch, but it's also one of the more attractive and popular landscaping plants for people in urban areas as well. This species really stands out. There aren't many prairie species that have this striking reddish orange to yellow color. The variations in color are kind of delineated between the orange reddish being a little bit more in eastern Kansas in the silty clay loam soils. And whenever you get sandier habitats, like in the Ark River lowlands or the Smoky Hills, you get a little bit more of the yellow influence. The butterfly milkweed vegetation is the most extremely hairy of the milkweeds I've seen, and so when they're emerging, they have this very hairy look to them, which helps identify the species. And the seed pods, follicles, are skinny and smooth, and here you can see them dispersing their seeds. The final one that I'll highlight of the native milkweeds that are probably the more popular choices for the monarch includes the world milkweed, or Asclepias verticillata. This is one of the shorter species, but like the other three drier species I've shown, this one likes drier habitat and mixed to tall grass prairie upland areas, and more like about 2 to 3 feet max, usually lower in stature than that. And you can see the white flowers and the long, slender seed pods that are indicative of world milkweed. One species that I've seen a lot of debate on in recent years, and we have it's one that we have historically promoted through some of our sales at the Arboretum, has been the tropical milkweed. And one of the reasons we've promoted this species, it's an annual non-native species that thrives in tropical areas. The reasoning is that it is attractive to the monarch butterfly in a sense that the monarch will lay its eggs on this vegetation, and there is also nectar in the flowers that the monarch will visit, in addition to some other species as well. However, that is where the benefits begin, and there are some other problems that you get into for the monarch butterfly with this annual non-native species. One is that the vegetation stays greener longer than perennial milkweed, native milkweed species would. So for example, if you use this in northern Minnesota or the upper Midwest, it may hold a monarch longer in the late summer when there would be some close to getting into some dangerous situations for cold weather. That could be a bit of an ecological trap for the monarch butterfly. The same goes for further south in the plains areas. You know, if you have it growing in a pot and all the other milkweed has gone dormant, and you get some stragglers that instead of cruising on further south to where they should be following the cues to get to, they may be lured into staying and dropping eggs and having caterpillars form at a time when they could get frozen or, kind of overextend their stay as it gets close to winter. So that's kind of one of the considerations for a problem that it proposes for the monarch. And the second is a protozoan parasite that I'm not going to even try on the Latin name. Let's call it by its shorter name, OE, is a parasite that builds up in the vegetation of tropical milkweed and has an effect on the monarch that it increases, or it has reductions in body mass, lifespan, mating success, and flight ability. I also understand from what I've read, the cardiac glycosides that monarchs or that milkweeds generally hold and pass along to the monarch that gives it, that distasteful characteristic or those, warning coloration signs they've evolved with, that those toxins or those glycosides are even more pronounced and concentrated in annual milkweed, which can have a bit of an effect on the monarch caterpillars as well. So something to consider. There's still a lot of debate out there in this, but I think in general, from what I've read from sites like the Xerces Society and some other peer-reviewed articles, is that we should probably start getting away from use of tropical milkweed and focus on perennial species, at least when it comes to the health of the monarch butterfly. Moving on from milkweed, planting nectar plants throughout the growing season is another important strategy. Not only do the monarchs need host plants, they need nectar throughout their migration route. And the more diverse, the better when it comes to providing both diversity of nectar sources and timing throughout the season. So with regard to timing, let's look at some of the diversity that we have or that I like to utilize in my urban landscape that are great plants for spring color and also providing nectar for insects, including the monarch butterfly, would include the species you see here. I'm going to focus on the species where I see the most butterflies being attracted to, and including some other insects and moths and so forth. And that would be the 4 species that you see here in the bottom right. I'll include the rose verbena, Verbena canadensis, or now it's also called Glandularia canadensis, and a very low in stature, a beautiful pinkish purple flower. Another in that color range is blue star or Amsonia. This species happens to be a Tabernet montana, and another short or diminutive species that is attractive to pollinators and also aesthetically pleasing to humans as well. 2 species in the yellow category would include golden ragwort, a Senecio species that is one of the first species to emerge and bloom. It can still be really cold, and you see this one sending up those flowers and being able to provide nectar for early pollinators, and possibly, at a time when the monarch is coming through. And then another species that's yellow that's a little bit later than golden ragwort is golden Alexander. Zizia aurea is this species. So just 4 among many others that you see in this slide of some great landscaping options in urban areas as we think about being good hosts to insects as well as the monarch in particular. So those early spring species, more in the April to May calendar time, give way to summer and the months of June and July that you would see in this particular prairie as a model. Species in purple of purple prairie clover, this round globe of rattlesnake master. You see some yellow coneflower or gray-headed coneflower. You see some bee balm monarda. You see some black-eyed Susan, some echinacea over here on the right, some liatris or gay feather or a blazing star in the background there in that spire. A number of great species that provide nectar and habitat for lots of insects, including the monarch butterfly. Here is a little closer look at some of those species that I think are just 5 fantastic species that are aesthetically pleasing as well as great nectar sources for the monarch butterfly, including purple prairie clover, legume species. You see this little ring also gives it the common name purple tutu. The many different echinacea species, this more common one is the narrow-leaf coneflower or Echinacea angustifolia. This species in the sunflower family would also have some medicinal characteristics for humans, and both in the seeds and the roots of being a medicine plant revered for thousands of years by many generations of people. Continuing with the purple theme, the liatris, the Kansas gay feather, Liatris pycnostachya, is one of the taller species. There are other species, but this one really is showy in the late June to July time. And then another couple of other species in that time frame include wild bee balm, a plant in the mint family, Monarda fistulosa, and then species in the Rudbeckia genus, like black-eyed Susan, which is Rudbeckia hirta, or this one is Missouri black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia missouriensis. Moving on to fall, the months of August and September and into October, you get species like the yellows really start to come out. Of course, you have the sunflowers spanning those two times from July into August and September. But what you see really prominently in this slide by Chris Helzer is rigid goldenrod. And there are many different goldenrod species that insects can take advantage of, including that's much needed by the monarch butterfly in its southern trajectory moving through the Great Plains and Midwest. And you also see the taller blue in blue salvia. And I feature these two species here further as we take a closer look. Rigid goldenrod, blue salvia, both just striking species that you can use in a landscape. And then you also have species like button blazing star, Elytris aspera, and some of the many different asters that you see, like aromatic aster, Aster oblongifolius, here shown in the bottom right. And these asters are really strong nectar source, ranging from September on into October and even early November, with various varieties like October Skies and Radon's Favorite. So in addition to what we plant, we also think about some of the structure that helps protect monarchs in their journey. These can be physical structures like homes, sheds, fences, or they can be, trees that provide some kind of a windbreak as well. The migration only happens during the daylight hours, and at nighttime, monarchs are finding places to kind of have a place to rest and find protection. And especially when they get met with, say, a strong wind that is impeding their migration, they may hunker down for a couple to few days to wait it out and wait for a more favorable wind direction. We have some of these features in the Arboretum in Heston, and the hedgerow that runs east to west is a really strong one you see in the background of this. And then some pines that we have in a little pinetum area. These white pines also seem to be popular places for monarchs to congregate when they get met with that headwind in their fall migration. In fact, we also, they're supported by some of these other peripheral habitats around next to these features of the hedgerow and the pine trees. This is more of a summer look of one of the native beds that you see nearby, but here is more of a fall look at another nearby bed where the fall migration is greatly enhanced by all the nectar that you see in the asters shown in this slide, probably representing both aromatic aster on the left and the taller in New England aster in the kind of the taller parts of this slide. So in general, monarch habitat tips include making sure you have a site with good sun. These are mostly prairie species, so they need at least a half day of sunshine. Choosing many different plants to bloom throughout the entire season to provide habitat as well. So monarchs in different, or milkweeds in different seasons, as well as other species. Planting in clumps, it both benefits humans that like to see splashes of big colors you saw in that last slide, and the monarchs would also be drawn to big splashes of color as well. The different heights just lead to different layers of habitat and shelter, both in plant communities and in physical structures. Don't be worried about the damage that you're seeing on the plants. Various insects will be eating these plants, and so remember, even though we're focusing on one species in the monarch with this presentation and these efforts, these are all efforts that improve habitat for many different insects, and that leads to greater biological diversity as we think about insects being a part of the larger food chain. So you need lots of different native host plants to attract the different insects that come into there, and that whole food web adds to the enjoyment of greater biodiversity in the amphibians and the reptiles and the small mammals and the large mammals and the birds, all of which are great for healthy ecological systems. And they're also interesting to humans to include in these areas of our landscapes as well. And also, don't worry about pests because we see them as part of the systems as well. And I'll say more about that in the use of pesticides. You know, there are kind of few reasons that humans should be, I think, applying pesticides in great general applications. You know, crops are one thing, and there's a lot of debate that goes around in that, but also what we use in our own home landscapes and in our own food systems as well. If we see that some crop damage and some eating of the plants in those systems by insects is being something that's just part of what happens in a system, and that is supportive in more of and is part of a greater ecological system in general, then we can have a more accepting view of insects in the areas that surround us. And so become more and more an advocate of trying to discourage pesticides around us, because not only do those impact healthy ecological invertebrate systems, but those systems also include the monarch butterfly. So citizen science is also an important part of what we need to do to help save the monarch. There are a number of great organizations out there doing this, including some of those that you see here, and I'll say a little bit more about that in the following slides. But it's also part of the storytelling that we can do that encourages other people to get involved in this movement to conserve monarchs and biological diversity. And it's also enjoyable to tell that story. And as we learn more about what's happening with the monarch around us and tell that story to other people, I'll just give an example of what happened last September in 2020 at Dick Arboretum. We saw this massive stopover event for a few days where there was a fallout of monarchs trying to avoid a storm and a big south headwind. During that time, you can see just a couple of great images provided by Jerry Epp here. Another one my colleague caught of this Mississippi kite that were just feasting on the monarch butterflies during that time as well. So the Mississippi kites weren't deterred by the cardiac glycosides apparently, and ate dozens and dozens of the monarchs during this stopover period. Just an interesting story to tell, and many others found that interesting as well. But other organizations that are great in promoting citizen science include Monarch Joint Venture, collaboration between both federal and state organizations housed out of St. Paul, Minnesota. But they provide many great educational resources, promote conservation in urban areas, and have many presentations to share. They also promote registering habitat for different people throughout the United States, and you can see a representation of that kind of an effort here. Another great organization is Journey North that highlights the migration of a variety of species, including the monarch butterfly. Different elements of that migration process, including the first adults that show up in a migration year, the milkweed when it emerges, the first eggs that are laid, the first caterpillars that emerge, you know, the migration of big numbers as you know, as you maybe see a roost happen in your area like we did last September at the Arboretum. These are all parts of the storytelling and sharing of data that we see as people out there on the landscape in the midst of this migration route, helping excite other people, sharing data, And it all contributes to the conservation of the monarch. When we hope that they will land in Mexico and congregate and have safety there. These are stories that you can also read by going to sites such as these. And something that I just love to see is, like, when are the monarchs coming? Start following in March, February, March, and early April. Here's like one example of the monarchs as they're being reported coming north. Monarch Watch, based out of Lawrence, Kansas, is where Chip Taylor is located, and their staff do a great job of promoting monarch way stations, which are habitat areas in urban settings. They promote tagging of monarchs to be able to track their progress and how far they get and where they are, and just great educational resources in promoting monarch conservation. The Xerces Society is another organization that not only promotes monarch conservation, but insects in general. And I feel that they're a great organization to promote for ecological health in conserving insects and biological diversity. Of course, our Dick Arboretum of the Plains is, we appreciate your support of us as well, and events like this class and our spring and fall plant sales. Our next one coming is April 22 through 25. These are just all ways for folks to get involved and get involved in planting habitat, planting milkweeds, getting engaged in citizen science. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is having fun, inspiring others to follow with you. That is just a part of spreading the movement and part of what we need to do to conserve this little keystone species, you might call it, as we strive for conservation and biological diversity in our urban systems. So with that, I'll leave you a little story of resilience and hope, one that I saw in the midst of the pandemic last September. This is an image of a chrysalis that I found on my back porch with my yard and my native garden in the background, one that I'm trying to expand and grow every year. But I realized that that is the closest location to milkweed in my yard, and the caterpillar that formed this chrysalis had to travel a distance of almost 45 feet to get to this location. An amazing travel against the odds across lawn and concrete, and to rise to protect its journey and keep the hope alive for the future generations of this monarch. So I thought that was sort of an inspiring story to leave you with, and as well as this great piece of photography of the monarchs down in Mexico. So with that, I will bring you back to the Dick Arboretum in Heston, and I will look forward to having a conversation with you about monarchs and taking your questions and hearing what you might have to say.